It's incredible to think that while most of the world is caught up in TikTok and Zoom, there are still people living in tribes that have remained largely unchanged for thousands of years. You've got to be tough to survive in a tribe, and if you're someone who gets upset over comments on Twitter, tribal life might not be for you. From fierce African warriors to the most isolated tribe on the planet, here are the 20 toughest tribes that even the U.S. Army fears. Number 20. The Great Sioux Nation. Native American tribes and First Nations peoples in North America are known as the Sioux or Oceti-Sakowin. The contemporaries are divided into two primary groups based on language, Dakota and Lakota. The Santee Dakota resided near Lake Superior before the 17th century, with lands in what is now northern Minnesota and Wisconsin. They fished with boats, harvested wild rice, and hunted woodland creatures. Throughout the 1700s, wars with the Ojibwe forced the Dakota into southern Minnesota, where they settled as the Western Dakota and Teton. The Dakotas signed treaties with the United States in the 1800s, giving up most of their territory in Minnesota. The Dakota War in 1862 stemmed from the United States' failure to fulfill treaty payments on time, as well as a lack of food supply. The Dakota were exiled from Minnesota to many reservations in Nebraska, North and South Dakota, and Canada. Gender roles were well delineated throughout the Sioux tribes. The village's males were charged with acting as hunters and venturing beyond the community. The village's women were responsible for creating clothing and other products, as well as caring for and tending to the house. Despite these roles, men and women shared authority and decision-making, and sexual preference was varied and permissible. Men who participated in traditional feminine tasks were referred to as wataki, while women who abandoned their roles as mother or wife to become prostitutes were referred to as wikawi. Number 19. Chimbu Skeleton Tribe. Amazing photographs have emerged of a mystery tribe that disguises itself as skeletons to terrorize their foes as they make their way to the Mount Hagen celebration. Groups of men dressed as skeletons dance and move around with sticks in stunning photographs. Other startling images show the tribe's men perfecting their face paint with hand mirrors and smiling to the camera while smoking cigarettes. The incredible pictures were captured by amateur photographer Pong Theron Tanthasindu, who grew up in Thailand but now resides in Toronto, Canada. The images show the Chimbu skeleton tribe of Papua New Guinea. They disguise themselves as skeletons to terrify their opponents into believing they are not human and possess supernatural abilities. The Chimbu tribe has mostly remained a mystery since first establishing contact with the Western world in 1934, making their skeleton body art all the more intriguing. Number 18. Arapaho tribes. The Arapaho are a Native American tribe who lived on the plains of Colorado and Wyoming. In the past, they were close allies of the Cheyenne tribe, as well as the Lakota and Dakota tribes. By the 1850s, two Arapaho tribes had emerged, the Northern Arapaho and the Southern Arapaho. The Northern Arapaho have resided on the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming with their eastern Shoshone neighbors since 1878 and are federally recognized as the Arapaho tribe of the Wind River Reservation. In Oklahoma, the Southern Arapaho coexist with the Southern Cheyenne. The federally recognized Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes are made up of their members. Men have always been in charge of hunting. Buffalo became the predominant food source once horses were introduced, with the flesh, organs, and blood all being devoured. Blood was either consumed or used to make pudding. Food preparation, hide dressing for clothes and bedding, saddles, and dwelling materials were historically done by women and two-spirits. Those known as two-spirits, or third-gender individuals, have traditionally held social and spiritual duties among the Arapaho. Anthropologist Alfred Kroeber wrote about male-bodied individuals who lived as women, the Hexa, who he said had the natural desire to become women. As they grew up, they gradually became women and could marry men. He also stated that the Arapaho believed the Hexa's gender was a supernatural gift from birds or other animals and that they had miraculous powers. Number 17. Asaro Mudmen. The Asaro tribe of Papua New Guinea's Mudmen, also known as the Halosa, wore traditional outfits focused on mud masks. They dwell in the eastern highlands province of Papua New Guinea near the settlement of Goroka. According to anthropologist Todd Otto, there are as many versions of the creation legend as there are sources. There are multiple oral history stories of the Asaro Mudmen's genesis. Legend has it that the Mudmen could not hide their faces because the inhabitants of Papua New Guinea believed the mud from the Asaro River was harmful. Rather than covering their faces with the purported poison, they created masks out of heated rocks and water from the waterfall. Number 16. Goroka tribe. The Goroka tribe of Papua New Guinea is well known around the world for its long-standing customs. The Goroka males wear exquisite headdresses made of parrot and birds of paradise feathers. The most costly adornments are those fashioned from seashells, which are a symbol of wealth and success. Before a wedding, A shell necklace is frequently given to a native girl by her prospective husband. The practice of wearing shell jewelry stretches back hundreds of years when small pieces of pearl were used in place of money. Due to no fault of their own, the Goroka people were cut off from the rest of the world. Their isolation is due to the continuance of tribal conflicts and difficult environmental circumstances. Their style of life is not dissimilar to that of regular people. The tribe is made up of households, each with its own set of obligations. The most senior representative is regarded as the family's leader. The Goroka tribe now resides in the area of the same-named province. A well-known tribal gathering and cultural festival in Papua New Guinea, which draws a large number of tourists, is held here every year on September 16th. It's the Goroka Show, where a variety of tribes gather to perform music, dancing, and showcase their culture. The 3-day event is guaranteed to appeal to those interested in learning more about the tribe's customs. Visitors to the Goroka province can tour historic coffee farms and factories, as well as a fascinating museum. Number 15. Shawnee Indians. The Shawnee are a native people of the northeastern woodlands who speak Algonquian. They resided in Pennsylvania in the 17th century, and they lived in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana in the 18th century, with some bands in Kentucky and Alabama. By the 1830 Indian Removal Act, they had been forcefully relocated to Missouri, Kansas, Texas, and finally Indian Territory, which became Oklahoma. The absentee Shawnee tribe of Indians of Oklahoma, the Eastern Shawnee tribe of Oklahoma, and the Shawnee tribe are all federally recognized tribes with headquarters in Oklahoma. Tecumseh, a Shawnee chief, earned notoriety in the early 19th century for creating his eponymous confederacy to fight American expansion on Native American territory. Tecumseh's War was the name given to the ensuing conflict. Chief Tecumseh and American statesman William Henry Harrison were both minor players in the Battle of Fallen Timbers, which ended the Northwest Indian Wars in 1794. The Great Comet of 1811 appeared in March that year. Tecumseh informed the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Muskogee, and other tribes that the comet of March 1811 had foreshadowed his arrival. He also stated that the people would see a sign showing that he was sent by the Great Spirit. Number 14. Yali tribe. The Yali tribe is most likely the smallest of the Papuan countries. However, some may yet be unknown. The Yali were first discovered in 1961. They lived in the highlands, which is Papua's term for mountainous locations where people live. Inland places, particularly those near mountains, are the least accessible and consequently the most recently found. The Papuan Yali tribe was one of the most feared cannibal tribes in New Guinea's western region. Despite the fact that mature men are rarely taller than 150 centimeters and have never been headhunters, their adversaries are pretty freaked out by them and keep a long distance as a result. Each valley's language evolved in its own way. The disparity was so pronounced that Yali tribal members think the valley's languages are incomprehensible to one another. The Papuan Yali, a clan of cannibals, was particularly feared because they completely annihilated their opponents. They supposedly not only ate the body but also ground the bones into dust and threw it into the valley. They did everything they could to keep the victim from returning. People from nearby villages were slain not just for vengeance but also for meat. Yep, pretty scary folks. Number 13. Kubo tribe. The Kubo, sometimes known as the Clubber Indians due to their use of battle clubs, dwell in the Javari Valley near the junction of the Itchui and Urakwa rivers. The majority of the population, around 200 individuals, continues to live in seclusion, migrating between the rivers Itchui, Kori, and Bronco. After several tries, outsiders were able to reach a small number of Kubo Indians in 1996. The Kubo began visiting Métis Indian settlements and encampments in the jungle after their meeting on the lower Itchui. The group is now split into 2 settlements. The Kubo are among the last people on Earth who live in near isolation from contemporary culture. Despite violent encounters with the surrounding villages on multiple occasions, they are popularly referred to as Kubo, despite the fact that this is not their own name. In actuality, Kubo is a derogatory term coined by a former enemy tribe and then embraced by the outside world as a tribal identifier. They are commonly referred to as caceteros by locals, a term that a French journalist mistranslated as head smashers due to its closeness to the French phrase cassette. Cacetero, on the other hand, just means clubber or man with a club, referring to their weaponry, much as the nearby isolated people known as flecheros are simply archers, referring to the weapons they employ as well. Number 12. Masai. Northern, central, and southern Kenya, as well as northern Tanzania, are home to the Masai, a nomadic ethnic group. Due to their location near the various wildlife parks of the African Great Lakes, as well as their peculiar customs and attire, they are among the most well-known indigenous people in the world. The Masai speak the Ma language, which is connected to the Tinka and Kalenjin and belongs to the Nilo-Saharan language family. Except for a few elderly persons in remote regions, most Masai people speak Swahili and English, the official languages of Kenya and Tanzania. The Masai population in Kenya was estimated to be 1,189,522 in the 2019 census, up from 377,089 in the 1989 census. The Masai are monotheists who worship a single god known as Enkai or Ngai. Ngai has two personalities, the beneficent Ngai Narak and the vindictive Ngai Nanyoki. The lion is also the totemic animal for the Masai. The Masai kill the lion in a different way than trophy hunters because it is utilized in a rite of passage ritual. Some people say that the people of this tribe violate all the laws of physics, but maybe that's just a myth. One frequent misunderstanding about the Masai is that before a young man may be circumcised and achieve maturity, he must kill a lion. Lion hunting was formerly a popular pastime in East Africa, but it is now prohibited, despite the fact that lions are still slaughtered when they prey on Masai cattle. Killing a lion, on the other hand, confers fame and status in Masai society. Number 11. Mohawk Tribe. The Mohawk tribe was the fiercest and most warlike of the strong Iroquois Confederacy's eastern components. They resided along the Mohawk River in upstate New York, from southern Quebec to eastern Ontario, and were known as the Keepers of the Eastern Door by the Iroquois Confederacy. The Mohawk were one of the most dreaded native Indian tribes, and their adversaries feared them because of their vicious and ruthless warfare. The Mohawk tribe was a hunting, fishing, and agricultural people that used their elm bark boats to travel widely along the Mohawk and Hudson rivers on hunting, trading, and war trips. Because of their violent methods and savage treatment of prisoners, the warlike Mohawk were feared across the region. The Constitution of the Iroquois Confederacy was formed by Deganawida and Hiawatha to unite the Iroquoian tribes and put an end to internal tribal conflict and cannibalism. The Iroquois Confederacy tribes waged war against all of their neighbors until they were all vanquished. The Dutch, Swedish, French, and British were among the first Europeans to engage in regular fur trading with the Mohawk tribe. During the protracted French and Indian Wars, the Mohawk joined with the British against the French. Most Mohawks moved to Canada after the American Revolution, and the great majority of them still live there now. Number 10. Suri Tribe. The Suri is a historical Pashtun tribe that mostly inhabits Afghanistan and Pakistan. They are said to be descended from the Ghurids, a dynasty that originated in Mandesh, in the Ghor area of modern-day Afghanistan. Sher Shah Suri, the founder of the Suri Empire in India, was from the Sur tribe. They controlled the Suri Empire from 1540 to 1555 when Humayun and the Persian army defeated them at the Battle of Sirhind and re-established the Mughal Empire. Suri people are now part of the Pashtun tribe structure and are associated with the Lodi and Batani Confederacy. The Suri are linked to the Gilji, another Batani tribal confederacy, although it is also thought that Suri is a Kakar Pashtun subtribe. The Afghan Suri tribe lived in the Ghor Mountains, east of Firuzkoh, and its main cities were Ghor, Firuzi, and Bamiyan. The Pashtun tribes, also known as Afghan tribes in the past, are members of the Pashtun people, a significant Eastern Iranian ethnic group that speaks Pashto and observes the Pashtunwali code of behavior. They are predominantly located in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and they make up the world's largest tribal structure with about 49 million people and 350 to 400 tribes and clans. Number 9. Apache people. The Apache is a group of North American Indians that played a prominent role in the history of the Southwest during the second half of the 19th century, under leaders such as Cochise, Mangas Coloradas, Geronimo, and Victorio. Their name is most likely derived from a Spanish transcription of the Zuni word Apache, which means enemy. Prior to the Spanish invasion, the Apache realm included what is now east-central and southeastern Arizona, southeastern Colorado, southwestern and eastern New Mexico, and western Texas in the United States, as well as northern Chihuahua and Sonora states in Mexico. The ancestral Apache, on the other hand, did not likely arrive in the Southwest until at least 1100 CE. The Apashean languages are definitely a subset of the Athabascan language family, and all other Athabascan-speaking tribes were originally situated in what is now Western Canada. With the exception of the Navajo, semi-sedentary plains Apache farmers were residing near the Dismal River in what is now Kansas as recently as 1700. Despite the Apache's final decision to embrace a nomadic lifestyle reliant mainly on horse transportation, when the horse and gun markets collided in the Central Plains around 1750, traditionally nomadic groups like the Comanche began to engage in guerrilla raids. The Plains Apache that remained were heavily pressed and fled to the south and west. Despite being one of the most ferocious groups on Mexico's and America's colonial frontiers, And maybe because of their faith in their own military might, the Apache first tried to make friends with the Spanish, Mexicans, and Americans. Number 8. Kazakh nomads. Western Mongolia's Kazakhs are one of the world's few remaining nomadic civilizations. The Kazakhs were formed in the 15th century by a mix of Turkic tribes that arrived in Transoxiana around the 8th century, and Mongols who arrived in the 13th century. They mostly practice Sunni Islam and speak Kazakh, a Turkic language of the northwestern or Kipchak branch. At the turn of the century, Kazakhstan had about 10 million Kazakhs, and China had about 1.4 million, mostly in Xinjiang, with smaller populations in Uzbekistan, Russia, and Mongolia. After the Uzbeks, the Kazakhs are the second most populous Turkic-speaking population in Central Asia. The Kazakhs were traditionally pastoral nomads who lived in movable dome-shaped tents called jairs or yurts, made of dismountable timber frames covered in felt. All year, the Kazakhs moved their animals, which included horses, sheep, goats, cattle, and a few camels, periodically to locate pasture. Number 7. Maori people. The Maori, who were originally Polynesians who arrived in New Zealand during the 11th and 13th centuries, are recognized for their unique warrior culture. The Maori people of the past were separated into violent tribal groupings, each marked with its own armament and fighting style, which are still present today. The Maori combat culture has earned them a reputation as some of the most fearsome warriors in the South Pacific. Throughout history, the Maori were among the most dangerous warriors the British encountered during their advances. They possessed a strong combat code and a lengthy history of warfare. They were schooled in the skills of combat from an early age, learning how to use a variety of distinctive weaponry, fighting methods, and the now famous haka dance. To safeguard their tribes, the Maori erected defensive fortifications in key locations. The Maori tribe's guerrilla warfare was a heritage of devotion to the struggle, which was shared by many New Zealand tribes. Warriors were dispatched in troops known as hapu when the battle season began. A hapu might have anything from 100 to 140 warriors. Women were also educated in the techniques of combat. Therefore, the Maori war party was not exclusively made up of men. The hapu was commanded by a war chief, whose primary goal was to inspire his soldiers to battle. The war chief of a hapu was supposed to fight alongside the others, and if he perished, the war party was expected to retreat. Number 6. Cheyenne tribe. The Cheyenne tribe used to include the Northern Cheyenne. The tribe mostly dwelt in what is now Minnesota before relocating to Dakota land. They were a hard-working nomadic people who had a great understanding and respect for the land. Buffalo and other animals they hunted were used to make clothing, shelter, bags, and tools. Plants and leaves were collected for food and medicinal purposes. The Northern and Southern Cheyenne tribes divided around 1825, with the Northern Cheyenne relocating to eastern Wyoming. For decades, the Northern Cheyenne fought the United States Army in violent engagements in what is now Wyoming and Montana. Hundreds of troops were slaughtered in what became known as the Sand Creek Massacre. In the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876, the Northern Cheyenne joined forces with other tribes to help defeat U.S. soldiers headed by General George Custer. There were other conflicts after that. The Tongue River Reservation, subsequently renamed the Northern Cheyenne Indian Reservation, was formed in 1884. St. Labrie Catholic Indian Boarding School opened in Ashland, Montana, the same year. Despite their numerous struggles, the Northern Cheyenne are proud of their history and legacy. They use storytelling, painting, singing, drumming, and dance to pass on the traditions of the past to today's kids. Number 5. Pawnee tribe. The Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma has a rich and illustrious history that dates back over 700 years. The Pawnee tribe inhabited the region around the North Platte River in Nebraska in the early 1800s, with over 60,000 people. The Chowie Grand, the Kickahaki Republican, the Pitahawarata Tapage, and the Skeety Wolf were the 4 bands that made up the tribe at the time. The Pawnees, who were classed as the friendly tribe by the U.S. government, were brave and tenacious warriors. Some Pawnee warrior conflicts for the preservation of lives, land, and goods were legendary. Crooked Hand and the Skeety Band, for example, rose from his bed to gather the elderly men, women, and children and lead the fight to protect their land. Despite being outmanned 2-1, they defeated a stronger, armed foe and drove him away. To date, the Pawnees have participated in every military fight in defense of American liberty, beginning with the Pawnee Scouts who served throughout the Indian Wars. On October 15, 2011, a ceremony was conducted to commemorate the U.S. Army's Bravo Pawnee Company 486 Civil Affairs BN's decision to change their name to represent this illustrious Pawnee legacy. Today, there are approximately 3,200 tribal enrolled members, and Pawnees may be found in various parts of the United States, as well as other nations working in a variety of fields. Pawnees are extremely proud of their ancestors. Their tribal religion, which is rich in myth, symbolism, and intricate ceremonies, has left an indelible mark on history. Number 4. Waorani tribe. The Waorani, commonly known as the Wayos, are an Ecuadorian indigenous people who live in the Amazonian region. They are distinct from other Ecuadorian ethnic groups. The alternative term Auca is a derogatory exonym used by nearby Quechua indigenous and widely adopted by Spanish speakers. Auca is a Quechua word that means savage. They number around 4,000 people and speak the Waorani language, which is a linguistic anomaly that is not connected to any other language. Their original territories are around 50 miles south of Coca, between the Curare and Napo rivers. Oil prospecting and illegal logging are threatening these homelands, which are around 120 miles wide and 75 to 100 miles long from north to south. The Waorani were able to defend their culture and territories from both indigenous adversaries and invaders in the past. They have transitioned from a hunting and gathering civilization to mostly living in permanent forest communities during the previous 40 years. 5 communities, including the Tigari, Taramenane, and 2 other uncontacted tribes, have refused any interaction with the outside world and are continuing to retreat into increasingly remote places. Number 3. Comanche. The Comanche are a Native American tribe from the present-day United States Southern Plains. Today, the Comanche people are members of the federally recognized Comanche Nation, based in Lawton, Oklahoma. The Comanche language belongs to the Uto-Aztecan family of Numic languages. It was once a Shoshone dialect, but it split off and developed its own language. The Comanche were formerly members of the Great Basin Shoshone people. Comanche people inhabited much of what is now northwestern Texas, as well as surrounding territories in eastern New Mexico, southeastern Colorado, southwestern Kansas, western Oklahoma, and northern Chihuahua in the 18th and 19th centuries. Comancheria was the name given to the historical area by Spanish colonists and later Mexicans. Comanche people lived in a nomadic horse culture and hunted bison in the 18th and 19th centuries. They traded with surrounding Native Americans, as well as merchants and settlers from Spain, France, and the United States. The Comanche fought wars against and plundered the towns of neighboring Native American tribes. When European Americans encroached on their area during wartime, they captured prisoners from neighboring tribes and used them as slaves, sold them to Spanish and later Mexican immigrants, or adopted them into their tribe. Thousands of prisoners were adapted into Comanche society after raids against Spanish, Mexican, and American settlements. Most Comanche were forced to reside on reservations in Indian Territory by the 1860s and 1870s after being decimated by European illnesses, fighting, and European encroachment on Comancheria. Number 2. Kiowa. The Kiowa are a Native American tribe and an indigenous people of the United States Great Plains. In the 17th and 18th centuries, they traveled southward from western Montana into Colorado's Rocky Mountains and then into the southern plains. By the early 19th century, the Kiowa were relocated to a reservation in southeastern Oklahoma in 1867. They are now known as the Kiowa Indian Tribe of Oklahoma by the federal government. There were 12,000 members as of 2011. The Tonon language family's Kiowa language, Kaigwu, is at risk of extinction, with only 20 speakers as of 2012. The Kiowa were a warrior nation, as were other Plains Indians. They battled foes from both within and outside their borders on a regular basis. Even among Plains Indians, the Kiowa were known for their long-distance raids, which included incursions as far south as Mexico and as far north as the northern prairies. Almost all of the fighting was done while mounted on horses. To the north and west of Kiowa land, the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Navajo, Ute, and occasionally Lakota were enemies. They battled with the Pawnee, Osage, Kickapoo, Kaw, Wichita, and Sac and Fox tribes east of Kiowa land. To the south, they battled the Lipan Apache, Mescalero Apache, Chiricahua Apache, known as the people of the turned-up moccasins by the Kiowa, and Tonkawa. During the Indian removal period, the Cherokee, Choctaw, Muskogee, and Chickasaw were among the Indian tribes relocated to Indian Territory from the American South and East. These eastern tribes discovered that Indian Territory, where they had been dispatched, was already populated by Plains Indians, namely the Kiowa and Comanche. Later, the Cheyenne and Arapaho would forge a formidable alliance with the Kiowa, the Comanche, and the Plains Apache to battle invading settlers and U.S. soldiers, as well as Mexicans and the Mexican Army. Now it's time for today's topic. In the dense jungles of Papua New Guinea, there is a tribe that even the bravest explorers hesitate to approach. Known as the Kypo warriors, this tribe has been feared for centuries due to their extraordinary strength and vicious nature. They are said to be one of the most dangerous and isolated tribes in the world, with a reputation for surviving in the harshest conditions. In 2018, an adventurer named Lars Jorgensen decided to document the lives of these remote people. What he captured on camera was nothing short of chilling. Standing next to one of the Kypo warriors, Lars seemed small in comparison. The warrior, towering over 7 feet tall, was covered in mud, wearing nothing but animal skins and bones as trophies of his hunts. His body was scarred from countless battles, and his intimidating presence was matched by his brutal weaponry, a spiked club, sharpened by hand. The Kypo tribe's brutal initiation rituals and battle tactics have been whispered about by neighboring tribes for generations. Some say they are descendants of ancient warriors who once dominated the region, and that their combat skills remain unparalleled. Lars's encounter with the Kypo warriors raised even more questions about how such a tribe could remain untouched by modern civilization. Number 1. North Sentinelese. The Sentinelese, also known as the Sentinelese or North Sentinel Islanders, are a people who live on North Sentinel Island in the Bay of Bengal in the northern Indian Ocean. They are classified as a particularly vulnerable tribal group, and they are part of the Andamanese peoples as a whole. The Sentinelese appear to have constantly shied away from contact with the rest of the world, which seems pretty smart. They have even slain several who have attempted to land or approach the island. North Sentinel Island was proclaimed a tribal reserve by the Indian government in 1956, and travel within 3 nautical miles of it is restricted. It also maintains a continual armed guard to deter outsider invasion. It is not permitted even to take photographs. The number of the group is unknown, with estimates ranging from 15 to 500 people, with the majority falling between 50 and 200. In November 2018, John Allen Chow, a 26-year-old American trained and sent by All Nations, a Christian missionary organization based in the United States, traveled to North Sentinel Island with the goal of contacting and living among these Sentinelese in the hopes of converting them to Christianity. He failed to obtain the appropriate licenses to visit the island. He tried to sing praise songs to them and speak to them in Hausa, but they didn't respond, while other attempts at communication resulted in their breaking out laughing. Fishermen later witnessed the islanders dragging Chow's body, and they discovered him dead on the beach the next day. What do you think about life in one of these incredible tribes? Should we always respect their way of life and leave them undisturbed? Or do you think it's inevitable that everyone will eventually embrace modern conveniences like Starbucks and Instagram? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to check out more awesome content showing up on the screen right now. See you next time.